I'd like to apologize in advance for the audio quality of this video. My microphone cable was picking up alien broadcasts from the mothership, and it even cut out at one point in time. The problem is fixed, but I didn't know that until after the video, so sorry about that. Hey, Alex again, and welcome to the next question and answer video. This is going to be for July and August, I think, or the end of July and August, whatever. As a lot of you have noticed, I've been out of commission a bit lately. Sorry about that. If you saw the last video I put up, I explained I had a whole bunch of life things going on. Then I got an inner ear infection, and the meds that I was on just made me into a zombie. So actually recording things was a waste of my time. I tried a few times and it didn't work out that well. But it does mean that I have been working behind the scenes on doing tests and gathering information for videos that are going to be coming out, so that's a good thing. Just a peek behind the curtain, stuff that I've started working on already. I made a list here. So I'm filming the next two parts of the 3D bit printing series. I have a little piece on Linux coming out because I think before I get into some stuff with microprocessors and some tools that you need with them, I need to explain Linux a little bit. Plus I'm going to be talking about some firmwares that depend on Linux and like Octoprint that runs in Linux and that type of thing. I have a Marlin 2.0 video coming soon when that hits, or when that drops officially. I'm going to be doing that. I've had a long spanning, I guess, a project about extruders that I want to put out, extruder math, how to calculate, all the volumetrics of that and how fast you can actually print as compared to like how much plastic you can melt and that sort of thing. That's going to be a real nerdy video, but I want to tie it into an extruder project as well, just to keep people interested. I have some videos on like open source theory that's probably not going to be a particularly popular video, but some people probably have no idea what it means, so I figured I should put like a little 5-minute data dump out about that. I'm waiting still from China from like 2 months ago, a few steppers for a stepper torque test comparison video. And I started a little while back on a TMC 2130 like torture test and like, spec setup and what its actual parameters are. That type of video as compared with certain settings in Marlin. But I had to keep putting that on the back burner because like those things that were a problem in Marlin kept changing. And I think they've fixed a bunch of them now. So I'll get to that eventually. I've also had to, because I have a few videos that are involving Octoprint and the virtual COM port on the computers coming up, I had to find a machine that would triple boot so I could do an apples-to-apples comparison between 3 different operating systems and how fast the virtual COM ports work. Because as some of you have found out, some of the limiting factors with tethered printing tends to be the speed at which your COM port can send and receive information, because you have a whole lot of overhead depending on how the drivers work and that sort of thing. I also testing the COM speed of a few different general computing boards, and that relates to Octoprint and Clipper and a few other things that I'm going to be touching on in the future. I'm setting up a test to like torture test some of the cheap Raspberry Pi boards and some of the Raspberry clones. So for instance, like a Pi Zero W and the Banana Pi Zero, which is just like the Pi Zero W, except they fixed a few things, particularly the Wi-Fi, and they put a quad-core processor on there instead of the single-core. That's been causing a lot of problems with that as a compute platform, and it's still pretty cheap. But there's no pre-rolled OS image for that, so I'm going to probably have to install like Debian for ARM from scratch instead of just like tossing Raspbian on there and see how that goes. But anyway, so let's get to the questions. And I did answer a lot of these questions in the comments, like at least once a week I would try to get on and answer them, but for some reason some of those answers have disappeared, and I just checked back through my comments and I don't see them, so I don't know what happened there, unless I'm just not seeing them on my config page because it's using a new page now. But regardless, what I do here is I take questions that I think will be of value to the community, and then I just say what they are, what video they were posted under, who asked them, and then give a really quick reply. So these Q&As tend to be pretty information dense, and it's tough to know, if I'm going to hit something that you asked or if it's something that you're interested in. On the 32-bit basics video, what is this? Calculator, I get it. I'm an idiot. He asked, thanks Alex, I'm interested in doing my own servo-driven Delta dual extruder with heated bed and self-calibration. It's going to be a great holiday project, especially starting from zero. Yeah, that is an ambitious project, but I always encourage people to just dive head in. Like, get up to your eyeballs in craziness so that you're in that weird zone, like when you're in math class and you just totally don't understand something, and just work with it until things start to gel. And servo-driven, that's cool. Do you mean, I don't know if you mean servo as in closed-loop correction for the position of the arms or what, but I encourage anything servo on a 3D printer because that's something that I think should happen, but for one reason or another it hasn't yet. From the ramps review, Ridven Bagan says, which ramps is best, or should I buy the card for a PCB router? If you're running at 24 volts or higher, and you don't have very stringent bed requirements, or you're not running a bed, then a lot of those boards will work. Just make sure you buy one that, like I said in the video, has solid connectors, the capacitor ratings are what you need for your voltage, and as well as the poly fuses and that type of thing. On the Silent Step Stick Torque video, Jose Silvio Franco asks, hi, thanks for the detailed info. I'm building a printer myself using MKS Gen 1.4 with TMC2130 drivers. I'm having problems configuring the firmware, not finding detailed information on the internet about this. Do you have some how-to video to help in my case? Thanks. Craig the Pope also replied that it's pretty simple in the new version of Marlin to do that. Most of the stuff you need is in the main configuration file and configuration advanced. Other than that, it's just setting up the special features that you want, which can be a little wonky, but the stock setup it's functional, so it's not like you're going to screw something up. If you're doing this for like a first time, I usually recommend not going whole hog with like all the features at once, because it's pretty easy to reflash the boards, so just go with a general stock setup and then add bells and whistles as you go along. Under the TMC2208 video, Quidella Tomas asks, first question in configuration H says define motherboard Ultimaker, let me see, blah blah blah, then you edit the corresponding pins file, and can I copy paste a lot of lines from the ramps header? Yeah, the most complete board definition in Marlin seems to be the ramps definition. It has a whole bunch of conditionals for like the displays and pins and things like that. So you can copy and paste a lot of that information. Just be careful that you are not like double assigning a pin by pasting something in there that's, you know, doesn't work on your particular board. In which case you just have to reassign that pin in your pins.h header, which corresponds to whatever motherboard you set in your standard configuration file. There's also a debugging, it's at like M203, or I don't remember off the top of my head, where you can uncomment that, and I think it's called pins debugging, and then you send that command through your console, whatever you're using, like, you know, Pronterface, Octoprint, and it'll spit out what each pin is assigned to, and you can go through that and see if you forgot to assign something, or if you double assign something and that's why something isn't working, and, you know, that sort of thing. Okay, Ramps 1.6 review. Joshua Longnecker says, hello Alex, thank you for these videos. Thank you. Quick question, I not be using Ramps board for my tested bed, so the current there isn't an issue, but I will be running 24 volt for the rest. Theoretically, this should simplify things on the ramp board. I know you have caveats for most of the boards, but is there one that you prefer if the heated bed portion is not being used? If you're running 24 volts and the heated bed portion is not being used, then just use the highest quality board, or whatever's cheapest and most available. The big deal with those is, because of Ohm's law, which I've mentioned before, if you're pushing less voltage into a heating element, you have to push more current, and current is the killer on those boards. So going to a higher voltage, you have to push less current, and that takes the strain off of a lot of the components. And you don't have to worry as much. Just make sure that, like I said before in this Q&A, the capacitors are high enough voltage rating, and as well as the poly fuses and the connectors. Or the connectors current is high enough for what you need. Also under the TMC2208 video, Andre oh, I'm going to mangle this last name, Gavriliso, something like that, said, couldn't you just use both pins and two separate wires instead of a Y-wire? He's talking about the UART connection. Unfortunately, you cannot, because they only have one PDN to UART pin on the step stick, so you have to use the splitter cable, with the resistor on the one side. Vulcan Printer says, it's so great to follow someone who doesn't treat us like idiots. Refreshing. You're not idiots, you're lovely smart people, otherwise you wouldn't be watching my channel. If you're listening to me talk, obviously you have great taste in tech channel. Monkey332 asks, what about using a Raspberry Pi to do the computing, sending the commands to an Arduino ramps board? Yeah, that already exists, as he found out in the Clipper firmware. And again, I hit on this every question and answer. I will be doing Clipper. I'm waiting for some features to mature a little bit and to get some like testing done, because it's kind of in like a perpetual beta right now. And again, that's because I want to give it a fair shake. I think it's a good idea, and I don't want to do a review before it's ready for prime time, so to speak, because that'll give people a bad taste in their mouth. And to show you an example of how that works, since the last time I said that, they added support for TMC 2208 drivers, which was one of the things that was missing. They added a virtual SD card, which was another thing that was missing because it was causing stuttering coming from Octoprint. And what else did they add? Oh, LCD support. So now you can run an LCD, you can run a couple different types of Trinamic chips, and a virtual SD buffer. So yeah, it's getting better all the time, and hopefully I'll get to that soon. Hobby Rob asks, what in Peace's name is PID tuning? How the hell are you doing that? I don't think I ever directly touched on PID tuning, but it's not something that you must understand the fundamentals of to do. There's PID auto tune, which is part of when you set up your printer, and that's built into your firmware. Either you can reach it from the menu if that's enabled, or you just do it in your console, you know, Pronterface or whatever, for a tethered connection. And all that does is you have like a control loop, and instead of just sending like get hotter, stop being hotter controls, it more finely adjusts how it sends those so that it's not as spiky and you don't get a huge variation in your temperature, your hot ends and beds and that sort of thing. So yeah, when you do the auto tuning, it'll heat it up and cool it down a bunch of times, however many you set, and then it'll pick values that keep that most consistent as opposed to spiky and getting bad prints and whatnot. Under the Ramps Plus Duo mod, Jorge Mario Manuel Ortega says, what a mess, just use Marlin Configurator. Yeah, you can use Marlin Configurator for a lot of things. I don't personally use it myself for a couple reasons. By design, it's going to lag a little bit behind releases, is one. The second is it hides a lot of the nuts and bolts features, and you can't get to those without also going into the firmware and doing all of that by hand. So since I'm always doing wacky stuff with wacky parts and wacky homemade printers, I tend not to use configurators, but it does help you set up the basics very nicely, so give it a try. Somebody asks, oh, Colin Smiley asks, I'm new to this world and I have to replace my fried ANET A8 V1.5 before realizing there's nothing out there that's safe for a complete noob. Like me to get going in this situation. From one metalhead tinker to another, any direction programming flashing firmware for this on an ANET A8. I did reply in the comments. I hope that comment is still there. There are a ton of ANET help groups online, like Facebook groups and Reddit and that sort of thing. You could also try reprap.com or .org. I think they had a sub forum. ANET uses like some quasi-proprietary-ish stuff, and you can get replacement boards for those, but I think some of them they use their own firmware and bootloader, so you might have to reflash a bootloader, which is a bit of a pain in the butt. But if you're just replacing it with a ramps board, there's nothing wacky about that printer that makes it different than replacing a ramps board and all the other printers, so you could just find a couple nice visual guides on YouTube for doing that, and then use the discussion forums as a reference for your particulars. Like, they might have numbers for like steps per millimeter and like the direction of the axis. SysPowerTool says, I was just wondering, I'm having an issue with microstepping being so small on my Z-axis that the motors sound like they're skipping but don't actually move. Where do I adjust the microstep size? Originally I thought because it was too much weight, but with a Bowden extruder and carbon fiber guide rods I don't blah 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 blah. Yeah, usually what happens in those situations, if you have like a Z-axis that's doing like a just sort of thing and not moving, it means your acceleration is too fast or your jerk is too high on that. So you just go down to that section in the standard configuration file and just drop those way down. Like, there's no reason you have to be moving super fast on the Z-axis. And it's not like if you set it too slow, your head's going to outrun the Z-axis because it's going to wait for the platform to raise before it starts drawing the next layer anyway. So that's the first thing that I would look at. Well, first thing I would look at is make sure it's not obstructed. So unplug your Z-axis motor and try running by hand the screws all the way up and all the way down. Make sure it doesn't get tight in any area. If that's fine, then turn the acceleration and jerk down a little bit in the firmware and reflash. On the Ramps Plus Duo Mod video, nice video. What would you suggest to someone who does not own a Ramps 1.456 board yet? There are other versions of Ramps which claim compatibility with Arduino Duo, like the RADs and Ramps FD, which I didn't find any mention of in your video. What's your take on those? Yeah, I didn't mention those in a video, but I mentioned them in the question and answer videos that came out near the time of that video. The RADs is not GPL open source. The RADs board is Creative Commons no commercial or something like that. So they're a little bit expensive because you don't get knockoff clones because no one's allowed to make them. You have to buy them from the source. And the Ramps FD, there is no functional version that you can buy of that right now. The version 1 is the one that you can get from offshore resellers. Version 2.1 is the first safe version, though. What happened was, and I've explained this before, a lot of the manufacturers were excited to jump on a 32-bit bandwagon. They were looking for the new Ramps board, so they grabbed the FD before it was ready to go out to, you know, regular folks. And there are a lot of safety features and things that are not there that you actually need. So you would have to go through and modify a Ramps FD board if you bought it. Elite Stomper, he asked a question about, I'll summarize this. He was asking about an AlphaWise U20 printer with a longer 3D printer controller board that has a STM32 brand ARM chip on it. He linked to a video where I watched. He was just asking like what separate drivers are on it, what's the deal with that. 32-bit world, for reasons that I will reveal in the future 32-bit videos, it's very fragmented because it's not as easy as the 8-bit stuff where we're basically locked into one family of microcontroller. Since sky's the limit, there is no one family of microcontroller that's 100% solid right now. Like, some of them kind of like miss features here and there, and they're all simultaneously getting better as people pick up one or another of those as a pet project and work on it. So, for example, like, you have like the LPC microprocessors and the SAM microprocessors, the STM microprocessors. You have Teensy, you have ESP32, all that stuff, and they're all in various states of right now. So anyway, that board, yeah, it has an STM microprocessor, which is supported by Marlin, but there are some features missing. You can get it working, just not working and fancy. And I'm not sure it does tethered printing at the moment. But that particular model has a 512K of flash and a whole bunch of RAM, so you have plenty of space to add those bells and whistles as it comes. Unfortunately, soldered to that board are A4988 chips, so they're not bad chips. They're just, you know, they're noisy and have all the problems that we've known about for a decade now. They also seem to use a CH340 chip for serial to USB bridge, which isn't the best chip, and you'll have to install aftermarket drivers, but it is what it is. I'm not sure why they did that, because STM chips have built-in USB, so whatever. On the brittle PLA filament, Rodolfo Padilla Ruiz says, all I learned was that the filament was likely faulty. I think he meant that as an insult. I'll say that more salty. Well, all I learned was that the filament was likely faulty. I'm sorry that's all you learned. I learned a lot more. Actually, the big takeaway from that video for me personally was that if you keep your PLA filament away from ultraviolet light, it lasts a lot longer. So check out that video if you haven't seen it, where I took filament that was literally like 3 years old and has been, you know, sitting just the little remnants that are on the spool. Like, I poured all those like a pack rat. Those were like stuffed in a shelf in a closet where they were out of the light. And then I took like a couple different types of brand new PLA filament and like exposed those to the elements for like, you know, a week or 2 weeks or something like that. And some I shone under like UV light overnight, and those went bad and were unprintable, whereas the stuff that was on the shelf was fine after 3 years, even though it was exposed to lots of atmospheric moisture and moisture cycles and things like that, very temperature conditions. The only variable there was they were not in direct airflow and they weren't in the light. So Jiri Nemec says, fantastic news from Marlin firmware. 1.19 is the last 1.1 tree version. This is true. Develop is fully moving to the 2.0, which includes ARM support. Yes, it does. I didn't use Marlin. I have SmoothieWare on both my printers, S-Base and AZSMZ Mini, but SmoothieWare is stuck in development and Marlin is now supporting S-Curve. Yes, it is. Linear advanced, powerless recovery, and even junction deviation, just like SmoothieWare. I'm not sure if I will switch to Clipper or to Marlin, but I am starting to hate SmoothieWare. Well, if you have a 32-bit board already, I probably would say don't go with Clipper, because that's kind of meant to do 32-bit tricks on an 8-bit board. Give Marlin 2.0 a try. It's not full primetime release right now, but it is in a very usable state. I use it every day, so other than the occasional, like, you know, growing pains, it hasn't been too much of an issue. And yes, they support all those fancy schmancy features, and they're getting better every day. So on the simple Arduino motor control video, Pauline Middlelink says, when you mentioned the motor going back and forth at the end of the video, I was reminded of some of my motors having a different pin layout. Yeah, that's a pain in the butt. I hate when that happens. You might want to add something like that in your video. I'm sure folks are going to bump into that and complain loudly. Yes, Pauline, you are correct. And I've run into that same thing. I got a video for, not a video, where is it? It's somewhere. For one of my torque test videos, I ordered a bunch of different steppers that had, you know, different inductance ratings and things like that, and one of them had like a completely bizarre color code for the stupid plug, and no matter which way I switched around, I couldn't seem to get it to print or to move correctly, and then it ends up one of the coils was burnt out like right from the factory, and I couldn't return it because I'd had to cut the connector off and rewire it so many times, so I just kind of, you know, ate $10 on that stepper and threw it in the bin. But yeah, that's another thing to check for sure. If you get a weird, like, if you get a stepper where instead of moving it just goes like, that's a sure sign that either one of the coils isn't getting its signal, or one of the coils is bad, or you just have the colors on the wire swapped around on the connector. Furthermore, and on the subject of cheap boards, the ESP32 dev board might have worked too for those folks who have one or two lying around. It too has an Arduino compatible library. Yeah, a couple people have made it a pet project to start supporting the ESP32 boards in Marlin. I don't know if all of those features are rolled into Marlin 2.0 main yet, but they are there, and those guys have built functional printers with ESP32 chips. Since they're kind of limited on GPIO, like input-output pins, a lot of times you have to use like port expanders and that type of thing, which isn't really that big a deal, but they definitely don't have as much natural in and out as some of the other ARM chips do, but they're silly quick and have like a lot of memory on board, so it's a decent platform for like a really wacky project. And the final question in my high-speed real-time print video, Michaelis Polyzois, I guess. Hi Alex, nice video. Curious what extruder you're running, because I cannot get the same volcano setup to go over 70 millimeters a second on 0.4 millimeter layers. Chewing the filament on the Zesty Nimble and clogging if I go higher than that with temperatures up to 250. Thanks. Yeah, I had a little exchange back and forth with that individual. Like I said, I plan on doing an extruder math video later on, and I already have a couple spreadsheets that I adopted from some other folks that will tell you what the limits of your extruder are, and I plan on doing like torque curve and speed analysis on a couple different things to see how to optimize the speed you can shove plastic through your nozzle. And bottom line, it kind of comes down to, now that we're getting into like delta printers and 32-bit world, and we can spit out a whole bunch of steps per millimeter, a big problem for extruders is melting plastic quickly and then cooling it down quickly, because it doesn't, once you get it to like really hot levels, like, you know, 250 plus for PLA, where it's basically just super liquefying it, it ends up acting more like a toothpaste than it does when you're printing at, like, you know, 40 millimeters a second, 60 millimeters a second, where it's much more well behaved. You also have like strange situations where if you're going around a corner really quick, in very toothpaste-y fashion, it'll kind of throw that layer out, and you get all kinds of other weird abnormalities that have to be solved with like rapid cooling and rapid heating and just the amount of metal you're able to pour through your nozzle. So anyway, thank you very much for sticking with me through that. I'll be having a video come out later on this week. This channel is community supported, so check out my support links in the description below. And until I see you again, get out there and make something awesome.